What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and I'm joined for another movie retrospective by the fantastic Jack. Jack, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be back. I think this is a natural progression. It's interesting to see if we continue this, where it might go next.
Yeah, we did the four parts, the original sort of four parts of Police Story with Jackie Chan. So we're keeping that action vibe and the action comedy vibe to an extent. Yeah, and we're leading up to whether these come out in time, but we'll be leading up to discussing 2024's Beverly Hills Cop 4 or Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. But of course, we've got to go back to 1984. Yes, so we are doing Beverly Hills Cop, the star-making vehicle of Eddie Murphy. Of course, he had 1982's 48 Hours, which made him a name with Nick Nolte, but this is what made him a star in 1984. So yeah, Jack, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? You know, have you seen 48 Hours compared or before this or after this? Or
I'm not sure what order they came in. I definitely had them both on a rotation when I was younger. 48 Hours probably more, I think, but purely for the fact that, as we all did at that time, we were all watching things too soon and too young because we could get access to it and we could record them off TV and we could secretly watch them when nobody was around. And 48 Hours felt a bit more dangerous. It felt a bit more grown up. It felt like you were watching something you really shouldn't be watching because of the language in it and the sense of the kind of, you know, the buddy comedy stuff in that is pushed to the extreme. They're not really buddies at all, and it's not funny. They just like to beat the shit out of each other.
yeah, it's a darker tone, isn't it? I mean, it's it definitely has that a harder edge, I'd say is it is. And it's a bit dark, harder edge. Yeah, I'd struggle to call it an action comedy.
Yeah.
The racism in it is kind of forefront. Yeah, this is still Eddie Murphy being Eddie Murphy. You've still got that kind of humor, but it's definitely toned down to be, if not quite family friendly, then at least it's a bit, you know, less in your face.
Yeah, I mean, there's still F-bombs, there's still an N-bomb in this. So, yeah, they're definitely willing to concede who he is and what he brings to the table. And obviously, I'm sure we'll delve into the backstory of this movie and who was supposed to be in it and how it got made and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely some meeting of what maybe the original intention was and who Eddie Murphy is. But yeah, it's not what, you know, it's not an R, it's not like a hard 18, is it? It's sort of toned down to a nice leveled 15, I would have thought, in this country.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the way I think of like Axel Foley is less sort of his character from 48 Hours is angry and, you know, is brash and obnoxious. Axel Foley's more impish.
Yeah,
you know, it's like putting bananas in a tailpipe or ordering food to the police on state. Like, you know, it's less sort of you know, looking to cause offense and more to sort of like, you know, joke at, like, you know, like humiliate people, but in a sort of a kind of funny, you know, much more humorous way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, those people he's doing those things to, as you just described, end up becoming, you know, close friends and confidants and teammates. And so, yeah, definitely, because although him and Nick Nolte kind of work together in the end of 40 Hours, they're never friendly. The vibe is never there together, is it? It's still an antagonistic relationship all the way through.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, you see that if you've ever watched another 48 Hours, it's a bit of a mess up film because it's clear they're trying to sort of toe the line between the hard art of 48 Hours and the personality that Murphy had adopted and sort of developed basically off the back of this. And it really is sort of a bit of it. Like Nolte's still doing 1982, and Murphy's like, no, I do Axel Foley now, and it really doesn't work. So yeah. But this film, the thing about this film that's interesting is, when we'll go to origins and stuff in a moment, if we talk about the plot really, but basically, sort of Axel Foley is a Detroit police officer who goes rogue, but it's sort of out of the bounds, but not in a sort of not in a Clint Eastwood kind of way, like in a sort of Dirty Harry kind of way, but like wants to get stuff done, works alone, all that kind of stuff. And one of his friends, Mikey, gets out of prison, and he hasn't seen him for 6 months. Comes to visit him, and he's got thousands of dollars worth of German barra bonds. After a night out of sort of like getting, catching up and everything, Mikey and Foley are attacked by two guys outside of Foley's apartment, and Mikey is killed. And Axel Foley ends up putting himself on the case whilst on vacation and tracks it back to Beverly Hills, and ends up being both sort of working against and eventually with the Beverly Hills Police Department to apprehend the smuggling ring that's going on. One of the things that's really interesting about is that to this film, I want to I'll throw in early because I think it goes back to this origins things and I hadn't really thought about it much in the past, but as I watched it this time, the class warfare, like the class structure in this film, because we've talked about like the race element of 48 Hours, which is blatant. There's a little bit of the race thing in this, but less so. It's much more about class. I mean, one of the sort of, you've got Eddie Murphy, this sort of fast talking, con man-esque sort of Detroit police officer. It's not about him being black in Beverly Hills, because you've got there's two black police officers and there's all this other stuff. It's literally about him being poor in Beverly Hills. Which is much more important. Like the class element or the sort of the wealth element is much more important in this film. And I thought that was really interesting for 1984, which is about greed is good.
I guess that came in a couple of years later, didn't it? It's like a mantra to take on.
Yeah. But you're already into the Reagan years. You're already getting like that element, that idea of wealth and individualism and all this other stuff. So it's interesting how, this what we'll see is this sort of 80s icon, this Axel Foley character. It's actually kind of a bit of a working class hero as well.
Yeah, I made exactly the same note, and it's interesting, the amount of films this goes on to influence, and Chris Tucker might as well just be Eddie Murphy reincarnate. I know you've been watching the Rush Hours recently.
Yeah.
Even like John McClane, I think you could trace back to this as well, couldn't you? Because he's that working class, blue collar guy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, watching this, you mentioned Chris Tucker, and Chris Tucker clearly in the sort of mid 90s was, Eddie's gone off the boil. I'm the like you say, the heir to the throne. What's interesting is watching this, I've also been watching all the Bad Boys films.
Yeah.
And Will Smith, even today, like his patter and his energy and all sort of stuff, like I find that there's about 10 years separating them. Like, Will Smith is the true heir to Eddie Murphy, in that kind of way, that sort of with that attitude and that sort of cadence and all that kind of thing. So
that's a really interesting. I've never ever put that together. I definitely thought of Bad Boys watching it this time because, again, watching this time and being a bit more analytical, I could feel some. It's early, but that Bruckheimer Simpson stuff is there. The music and the montages and the destructive car chases, and it's not all there, but you can see this is the start of it.
The seed of it, the germ of it is
100%. Yeah. And actually, the bit in the first Bad Boys when you have like the foot chase, that is like Will Smith has arrived. That is like, fuck, this guy's now a movie star. And this is like, I know what you're saying about 48 Hours. Yeah, Eddie Murphy was in that and he was good and that film was a success. But this is, this stand-up guy really can do this. This is a movie star. So that's a really interesting comparison. These are definitely, there's moments in both of these where you think like, oh, whoa, this is it. This guy's made it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think they both had something to prove. When you say about, Eddie Murphy was a stand-up comedian, he'd done SNL. That's what he was known as. He was this brash, offensive comedian. And he had something to prove. And I think the same with Will Smith. I mean, you read his
Mm.
biography, which is actually really good. I highly recommend it. He says the same thing in there. He's like, everyone, I'd done films, but it was always like, oh, that the kid from Fresh Prince is
Mm.
that silly, that boy rapper is going to do this thing. And Bad Boys was that. It was his chance to be like, no, I'm more
Mm.
than that.
Mm.
And I think it allowed him to blend those things, much as Eddie Murphy does later through the decade, sort of, blend those different bits and pieces together to really be himself.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think to come back to your initial point, so I think maybe I'll take us on a bit of a tangent. Oh,
no,
yeah,
good.
like with the like the working man type of thing. I think that's really interesting because you're right. The black is there, but it's not really other than the one scene in the foyer in the hotel, wasn't it? When he uses
Yeah,
it to get the room, which definitely felt like it. That felt a bit forced. That scene. It felt like
that
you
felt
remember
like
that bit in
48
48 Hours.
hours.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Remember the bit in the bar? Everyone loved
yeah.
that. Let's try and. But I think what's so clever about this is I agree with you. There's that kind of the class warfare stuff going on, but I think there's also that idea of like, he comes to Beverly Hills and there's all these enforced rules that everyone else is following, and
Mm,
he doesn't seem to understand even why the rule exists, let alone people are following it. So it has this kind of like against the upper class, but against kind of bureaucrats as well.
yeah.
And it's all these people who like when you're in that position, you don't like those people that are telling you that rule and you've got to follow it. And you don't like those people that flaunt their money in your face. It's very cleverly balanced and a very well written script in that regard, I think.
Mm. I think, yeah, because I think you're right. I think one of the reasons, I mean, they chose Detroit for a
Yeah.
reason. I mean,
Yeah.
Detroit has always been, this is the period when, car manufacturing is sort of dying out. And we know, just a couple of years after this, OCP will come along and save everybody. So they're all fine. As with Ronnie Cox, we'll talk about Ronnie Cox,
Mm,
but um, you have this difference, and I do love the way that they sort of like there's that juxtaposition of everything around Detroit is low crime in the sense of, and I don't mean low crime is in low crime levels. It's selling cigarettes, like
yeah.
it's a truck full of cigarettes. It's the station is relatively grimy and it's rough and it's all this stuff. And I love Inspector Todd. Gilbert R. Hill
Mm,
is like almost like the quintessential shouty captain. um, and so you have that, and then you
definitely.
take it, to Beverly Hills, and as you say, that the opposite is that all of a sudden, instead of like cigarettes, this is where cocaine is getting smuggled
Mm,
in. The crimes are bigger, the wealth is bigger, and then you've got like Ronnie Cox playing Lieutenant Bogomil as sort of like the boss and all this other stuff. Like it's two different Americas,
mm,
and
100%.
I do like that they quite well show that sort of difference between those two worlds, as it were.
Mm. Bogomil was such a great name as well. I don't know who came up with that or, how well known that is as a name, but it's wonderful. Yeah. And Ronnie
Yeah.
Cox is really interesting in this, isn't he? Because the juxtaposition between the two police captains is fascinating. The kind of soft spoken and the shouty and
Mm.
the rule. They both want to enforce the rules, but one sort of was willing to let him do the stuff because he knows he'll get the end product, and one is enforcing rules because it's the way that we do things here. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's a really interesting juxtaposition between them as well.
Yeah. But there's an interesting scene as well where, and again, I think this is one of the scenes where Eddie Murphy sort of highlights himself. We'll get into more detail about things in a minute, but I'm jumping around. But you've had for like 2/3 of the film, you've had sort of, fast talking, loudmouth Eddie Murphy doing bits and pieces or doing characters, sort of
Hmm.
with delivering flowers or, I mean,
And
the
when he's
home
in the
of,
warehouse, stuff is amazing. When
yeah, yeah, being
he's the inspector,
the
yeah.
inspector, all those kinds of things. But there's a moment when Bogomil pulls him up and he's like, right, you've outflanked two pairs of my officers. Tell me what you have.
Hmm. Yeah.
And Murphy sort of like does a dramatic scene where he's like,
Mm.
okay, look, I had a friend called Mikey, and this is what happened, and he just runs it through it all. And it's actually, I mean, it's not an acting masterclass. It's no Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. But the fact he switches it and does this dramatic scene is, again, you're like, oh,
Mm.
dude's kind of like, he can hold his own. But the difference between it is, again, Ronnie Cox's Bogomil takes him serious
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
and says, okay, let's, you're telling me this, it makes sense. I'm going to take
That's
you
it.
I'm going to take you at your word. So
Mm. And they bond over the coffee grounds, don't they?
yeah,
So he's the only one in Beverly Hills who understands, what that can be used for. It's about hiding the scent and these ideas. So again, I think there's like a leveler, isn't it? Like, oh, okay,
Hmm.
we
Real
both,
police officers, kind of thing.
yeah, I guess so. Which I also find really interesting because I was looking at some of the ages of some of the people, and like Eddie Murphy was like only 23 at this point
Yeah,
or something, which is
yeah,
crazy that he has this much charisma and star power. But also, he's a detective at 23. Like, wow, he must be really good at his job.
yeah. There's a bit of they do. They kind of make they sort of acknowledge that early in the film, don't they? When after Mikey is killed, and he's like, "Put me on the case," and his lieutenant Todd says like, "Look, you've got the energy and you've got the skill, but you don't have the years."
Mm-hmm.
So like, well done, you've got to this point. I think he's clearly supposed to be playing older than he is, but
Yeah.
um, you haven't got the years that somebody else has got, and that's where he takes the vacation time. So it's kind of acknowledged, but like they don't want you to pay too much attention to it.
No,
Um,
that's true. And he sort of, at this point, I think playing up is working right for him. And I
mm,
know Chris and Dave famously talk about it, but because you've got his name's escaping me now. Who is it that plays Taggart?
oh yeah,
But you've got
uh,
Taggart, who's what 36 at this point in this
yeah.
movie, which is hilarious because he looks like he's in his 50s.
This is
So
one of those things of
that
the
helps
80s,
set
isn't it? Yeah, it
age things
is.
up, doesn't it?
Yeah. This is one of the things about the 80s. Like you watch films. I mean, like, I found out not too well, quite a while ago that many of the sort of the characters in Cocoon were only in
Mm.
their like mid to late 50s. And you're like, really? We've got like action stars and Marvel superheroes and stuff still in their late
Yeah.
50s. So it's okay. Yeah, age is a different thing
Mm.
nowadays. So you're right. I think it works.
Mm.
But I think that's where this film does. I mean, I'd give Martin Brest, who's the
Mm.
director, not a big name, but he
Mid
had
Midnight Run, did he do?
that's it. I was going to say he
Yeah.
had form because he'd already done like Midnight Run, so he had some form for that, and he'll go on to do Scent of a Woman and stuff, and does some good stuff. But I find that this film is it lets Eddie Murphy run
Mm.
wild,
Mm.
but it also knows when to cut away from him.
Mhm.
And so I think it reaches a really good balance of saying like, no, we're not doing 48 hours and we're not going to do this is Murphy's the star, but this isn't a stand-up show. We're going to move
Mhm.
on to something else. Um, Before we get into all the action stuff, let's talk about the origins of this film
Mhm.
because um, it has some interesting origins, and it could have had other people in it.
Mm.
The most famous one I think we'll get to, but I think you mentioned before that I read somewhere like this script had done the rounds a number of times. I think they'd approached sort of everyone from like Clint Eastwood to Burt Reynolds to all those kind of people, and then it dropped onto Stallone's lap.
Mm. That's the big one, isn't it? And it's
Yeah.
obviously with Cobra, with the knowledge of that film's existence, it's fascinating to think. I mean, obviously, this changed a lot. It had to do. And the improvisational nature of Axel Foley as a character can only
Hmm.
come from the fact that Eddie Murphy was playing him, I assume.
Yeah.
And these almost kind of like Fletch type Chevy Chase. It's in that kind of realm, isn't it? You called him a hustler, and I think that's right. He sort of filibusts and he improvises, and that that feels like the character must have evolved to that because Eddie Murphy was playing it. Had it been Stallone, it would have been a very different. It would have been much straighter, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. It would have been. I mean, the fact that, like you say, that his version of this becomes Cobra,
Yeah,
you know,
not even
it,
subtle
not
either.
even subtle. Like, um, yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that he wanted to. So I've read there's a book called The Last Action Heroes,
Yeah,
by Nick
Nick, Nick
Semlin.
Dissemblin. Yeah, I read it recently actually. Well, I listened to Bronson Pinchot actually read the
Oh,
audiobook.
cool. Because he
Yeah.
also did he's one of of the comedians, the Wild and Crazy Guys, another great book. So I recommend both of his
Okay.
books. So yeah, Nick DeSemler's book's great. But he talks about it in there. And if I remember rightly, it was this is like before the rivalry of Schwarzenegger and Stallone.
Hmm.
But what Stallone was looking for was a follow-up to um, Rambo,
Hmm.
and he wanted to get away from Rocky. He thought Rocky was done. It was all like, okay, Rocky 3 finished it. That's it. That's the end of the story. I'm kind of done with that. And he was looking for a new franchise is probably the wrong word. I don't think they were looking for, franchise is not the sort of the idea that they had in the 80s. But he was looking for another hit, a big something different. And he was looking for a cop film, and he was thinking Dirty Harry and everything Hamfoot. And yeah, apparently he was kind of enforcing quite a lot of changes or quite a lot of dialogue and stuff. And in fact, in the book, they say that he basically turned up and was like a copy of the script and about like 50 extra pages. And was like, I've written these.
Which, having watched, a couple of the documentaries behind the scenes and watched Sly that came out last year, and that does seem to be his way.
Yeah,
is that he is always adding and rewriting and developing, and
yeah,
the guy won an Oscar pretty early on, right?
Yeah,
I can see
yeah.
why he has faith and trust and belief in his writing ability.
And I think that's fair. I mean, I think that from what I would say with Stallone, is very much. He held his ground with Rocky, and it paid off. So and then he made Rambo First Blood, and that paid off. And people said that was going to fail. So, because it's a whole different story about how it was like half an hour longer, and they cut out all the dialogue and all this other stuff. So, he'd held his ground on things, and so to have that confidence and that sort of this, well, I've held my ground in the past. This works. So I completely understand why he would be like, no, this is what I want to make. So I don't begrudge him that at all.
No, but as we know from where they went to go on to, that doesn't align with what Simpson and Bruckheimer do. Like that's not that.
No,
this as a kernel for what they go on to do for the whole time they were a pair, and then when Bruckheimer continued by himself, that seed would have been very different if we'd sown that one with the Stallone version and the dark and the broody and the serious. It just wouldn't have worked, would it? You think all the other things that have come from them since, it would have been an anomaly rather than the norm.
Yeah, I think Bruckheimer or Simpson and Bruckheimer. I mean, they're clearly it doesn't really. I can't remember what's in the book, but they seem to be a heavy part of why it didn't end up with Stallone, because they were just like, no, this is not what we want to do. Because the other thing I feel that this has an influence on, and I think I've said that balancing of tone that it manages to achieve. And I think because of the casting, because you've got, the straight guys are in it. You've said about like, Taggart, and you have Billy Rosewood, Judge Reinhold, and John Ashton. They are a great counter to Eddie Murphy's Axel Foley. But what I like is that like Ashton is he's the old, he's a bit like, well, I say the old warhorse. He's not, he's 36. He's younger than me. But he's meant to be a little bit like, well, I've seen things that I'm doing. Billy is the sort of, he's the pendulum between them, isn't he? Like, you can see that he's sort of torn between these two mentor sort of potentially influences. And I thought, when we talk about two, you'll see like, those first encounters with Axel have had an influence.
Yeah.
And so I like all this stuff they put together to create this balance. And you can tell that I think Bruckheimer and Simpson looked at this and were like, oh,
yeah.
Oh, like shit, this works.
Yeah.
This is how this works. Cool. And I think this became a bit of a benchmark for them where they were like, this is how we do these things. There's got to be this level of humor, and we've got to have, as well as action. And action, we start with a chase, or we do this and we do that. Like, I'm not saying they're formulaic, but they kind of are. But they've also definitely got a winning formula. I'd say that's the kind of,
Yeah, and the bare bones of the plot is, it's really quite simple. And I think it's that elevator pitch, isn't it? Guy from Detroit, fish out of water, rich people, yuppie types, but he's better than all of them. It's already, and it's really, Maverick, best pilot. People don't respect him. Goes to Top Gun fighter school where he's a fish out of water because he doesn't do things the way they want to do it. He becomes the best, and he shows them how to do it. Like, you could probably do that.
Literally, Armageddon.
Yeah.
We can't send up the professional astronauts. We're going to have to send up a bunch of sort of like oil riggers to do it. And you go, cool, yeah. It's a fish out of water, isn't it? Exactly.
But I mean, even, The Rock.
Yeah.
When it came, you could probably apply that formula to basically all their films. And then they build that, that's the skeleton. They build around it, don't they?
Yeah. I think they found that it works, and it works well with the right people. And I think that's starts here. But I also think this influences so much. This idea of like the comedians or sort of like the action comedy sort of comes out of this. I mean, you think of like the Running Scared with Billy Crystal or um, uh, James Belushi doing Red Heat
Oh yeah, yeah.
with
Arnie, yeah.
Schwarzenegger.
Mm.
And then obviously, eventually Stallone wanting to join the fracas of all this and doing Stop on My Mom Will Shoot.
Yeah, sure, yeah, yeah.
That
Certainly Tango and Cash as well.
Tango and Cash. Yeah, yeah. The
Yes.
better of the two buddy cop
Yeah.
films he did. Um, so yeah,
But
I think
even Lethal Weapon, I think as well, you could put
oh
into the category of
yes.
them looking back at this and thinking like, oh, we'll do our own little spin on that. We've
Shane Black was
yeah.
definitely riffing on this.
Mm.
100%. I definitely agree with that. But then
Even
Bad
to the
Boys
point of
2.
the intro of the characters, I thought this time watching it was like, oh, Eddie Murphy, as you said, in the truck selling cigarettes and doing the kind of undercover, and then oh yeah, Riggs, he's in that weird Christmas tree
Yeah, doing the
lot, isn't
cocaine
he?
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So even that was like that's pretty much the same scene. One's a car chase and one's a shootout, but still, like how we get introduced to those characters is pretty similar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things this film again, like this, because it's all the humor and I think the tone and the relatable humor as characters, but they also do the action quite well as well. Um, I watched in very quick succession though, Bad Boys Ride or Die, so Bad Boys
Okay,
4,
the new one, yeah.
and then Beverly Hills Cop from 1984. So there's a 40-year difference. And this has got a chase scene at the beginning, which I really enjoy. At the back of the van, I think it's great and it's really well done. I don't know if I've got, I don't know about yourself, because I grew up with them. I have a real affection for like 70s and 80s police cars.
I know what you mean. Yeah, this had a bit of a Blues Brothers-y feel.
Yeah, that's like a
Yeah,
similar tone.
yeah.
And I love that, and the music's great.
I don't know who that stuntman is as well, who's hanging on the back of that lorry, because
Yeah,
that is a
it goes
stunt and a
flying
half.
out and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Having I mean, it's no Jackie Chan, but still, fair play to him. He's doing some good stuff. But then I was like, okay, that's what the level is, and then you get to the shootout at the end of this, and there's a couple of other mini bits throughout it. But I was watching like you go to like Ride or Die, and
Right.
you're like, it's like you couldn't if you were to release Beverly Hills Cop today,
Mm.
and we'll see what four's like when it comes out in July.
Mm-hmm.
But there was I was like, this is very tame, and it just goes to show how like action has escalated pretty substantially in 40 years.
That's
So
interesting.
like Bad Boys 4 blows up like a theme park and mega car chases and all kinds of bits and pieces. And I'm just like, okay, it's cool. I loved it. I love all the Bad Boys films and they're great. But it was interesting how, although it was tame though, I was still invested in it. I was still in it. Like it still dragged me, it still pulled me in. So I didn't feel like there's like, oh, it's not as actiony as, whatever now.
No, and I guess it makes sense, doesn't it? When if it had been Stallone, it probably would have had a lot more action in it. But when it's Murphy, you've got to give him those moments to shine when that's what he's good at.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We know they don't film things chronologically unless they do that for a purpose and for deliberate reasons. And I don't know enough about the making of this, but watching it does feel like he grows into the role and into the more action-based stuff as the film goes. Like that first scene when he's going into his apartment and Mikey's there and like the doors open. So we've had the big chase, as you just said, and then he goes home at the end of the day. He's been reamed out by his boss and the doors open. So he goes in with a gun. Those moments, I was a bit like, oh, okay, yeah. Like if that's me trying to do that. Like, but nowadays, so they go and they do 3 days worth of training on how to hold a gun. I don't know if you saw the footage the other day of Austin Butler. So he's playing Chris in Heat 2. He's playing the Val Kilmer role.
Yeah.
And there's that footage of him doing like the loading and stuff, which looks like the mirror image of Val Kilmer from Heat. So they do all that shit now. So they look like professionals on the screen. Whereas Eddie Murphy looked like, here's a gun, point that there.
Yeah. This is what you say. Yeah. Now they'll do like, it's when you watch like the making of like the John Wick films. And they're like, yeah, we've been in boot camp for 4 months. And in this, they were like, Eddie, here's a gun.
100%. Yeah. But by the end, I'm totally convinced. He's doing, rolls and he's doing all sorts of things by the end. He just like jump at a forward roll and a spring into a shot. And by then, I'm bought in.
I do wonder if, because you make a good point about the chronology of how it's shot, but it's clearly it was shot in Detroit and it was shot in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, right? So it would not surprise me if they were like, okay, well, we doing the Detroit stuff because that's a location. So maybe that was the first stuff he did,
Mm.
and because the other thing that I think there was a difference there is for the first part of the film, although you get Lieutenant Todd, Inspector Todd, and you've got Ed Reiser, sorry, Paul Reiser
Paul
playing
Reiser,
Jeffrey.
yeah.
You've got a few things around him. It's still like the Eddie Murphy show. He's still got to hold the audience. It's not really until he gets to Beverly Hills that he's actually got a level of actor around him that probably gave him that sort of confidence. Ronnie Cox has been around for a while, and
Yeah.
John Ashton's done some time, and even Judge Reinhold by this point has done. He was a sort of a not part of the Brat Pack, but he's done those sort of like teen comedies and coming into his own. So he probably feels more comfortable having those, having that sort of around him, that sort of support network around him, maybe. So I don't know. Yeah, I see what you mean, though. I definitely understand what you're saying. It feels more confident in Beverly Hills than it does in Detroit.
Definitely. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because that I hadn't thought of. Because when he's with Mikey, again, I don't really buy that they've known each other for a long time. They're trying to like do
It
that
feels
whole.
improv.
It does, rather than it doesn't feel like they've been, friends and
Mm.
they've known each other for a long time. And they're supposed to be childhood mates and stuff, aren't they? And it was before Axel Foley went straight and they used to steal cars and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But conversely, when he's hanging out with, Rosewood and Taggart, and that does feel a bit more natural. So,
Mm.
yeah, I would be really interested to see, I don't know if there is a behind the scenes and a making of book of this and stuff. I think it'd be fascinating to see if what we're saying here is true, if there was an order to it and it was, get all the Detroit stuff done first, up sticks and go to Beverly Hills. Yeah, I don't know, but it would make perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I could imagine that being the case. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it? Like, what was the order? What was the shooting order?
Hmm.
And how often was Eddie Murphy on his own?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to do these scenes, and then yeah, when he was with these other actors that can be like, try this or think about that,
Mm.
because this is Eddie Murphy. Always, from what I know, very little of his sort of behind the scenes, but I know what he was like on SNL. Was he was almost like uncontrollable,
Mm-hmm.
but because he felt like so confident in everything he was doing, like he was uncontrollable. But when he started to do films, I think there was a culture shock where he thought like it was just going to be the same thing, and then it wasn't basically. So I can
Yeah.
imagine that there is that. Oh, you're in the big leagues now.
Yeah.
You've got
It's a little fish now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But again, all credit to him. Like every time
Mm.
he has to do things, and he comes across as one of the things as well. He comes across as brash, but less offensive than say said 48 Hours. But the other thing as well, he comes across street. He does come across streetwise, and I don't want to say hard, but like handy. Like he's capable. Like he can look after himself.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with that. And all of that that's kind of the underpinning of the character, I think. And then there's just that level of just charm. Just
Mm.
everything he does is charming, no matter who he talks to, whether it's in the little interaction with Serge, or whether
Oh,
it's when he's talking to Jennifer and they're reconnecting, or even in his interactions. There's the moment when he the like top dog Beverly Hills police captain comes in. Sorry, I know I'm
the
I'm really bad for
commissioner,
this. I'm sorry.
the chief.
I know
What?
you're a bit better at going linear. I'm a bit all over the place. I'm
No, it's
sorry, but
absolutely yeah,
yeah, when the chief comes in and he sort of lays down the law and he's got this like really serious voice and he's talking
yeah.
and then Eddie Murphy does his impression of him afterwards. I was just absolutely wetting myself watching it again the other day. So there's all these little moments where like he's just so charming as a person.
Mm.
I can understand why the world fell in love with Eddie Murphy, but also why all the characters within Beverly Hills Cop fell in love with Axel Foley. It makes perfect sense. I don't need convincing of that in any way whatsoever.
No, yeah, he's. I think this is one of those things I find with, you'll get actors that appear out of nowhere, but they're like in their 50s, and all of a sudden they'll hit a role, and you're like, oh, all of a sudden this person will hit it big, and they'll be like in their 40s or 50s, and you're like, oh Christ, they must have come out of nowhere. What have they done? And then you find out they've
Mm,
just been doing like loads of stuff before, but
hmm.
they've just not
Like
found a
Mark
character.
Rylance, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. Like he's done
Hmm.
loads of stuff before, but never sort of hit it big. But then there's someone like Eddie Murphy who's like, oh, we have a role for you,
Hmm.
and off it goes. Like you have just hit the ground running, and yeah, the world embraces you because all of a sudden that's just it.
Hmm.
And I think that's what actors dream of, isn't it? Finding that role where it's like bang.
Yeah.
I found the role of a lifetime. Um,
And to be fair to Simpson and Brooklyn, they're good at this shit, right?
oh
Tom Cruise as Maverick.
yes,
That was it. Like, there was
yeah,
no going back from there. Like
and
that guy
again,
was a superstar. Eddie
career
Murphy here.
making move again, career
Yeah.
making movie. Yeah, I wonder how many they've done because again, like
Well, Will Smith, Bad
Will
Boys, that's
Smith.
them as well, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
I'd even say to a short extent, they're the guys that elevated Nick Cage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so taking sort of like weird indie actor Nick Cage and making him
Yeah, yeah.
an action star. So
The guy from Vampire's Kiss is in your
yeah,
next Brooklyn
yeah,
Simpson movie. What?
yeah.
No, that's not right.
Him and an aging Sean Connery.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I think you're right. They know what they're doing. They
Yeah.
they they know how to do this, put this stuff together, and it really shows. Like this is a polished deal.
Mm.
Um, one of the things that's interesting about this though is again, I think this is that if we talk about it in 2024 terms,
Hmm.
because we said about the race element is there a little bit, but less so. Like it's Eddie that it's Murphy that Eddie Murphy introduces it in the hotel, but apart from that, doesn't really come up.
No.
Not an issue. We talk about the working class element that's kind of uncomfortable at times, but it's designed to be, but it's dealt with for humor because he's a working class hero. He's comfortable in his background. There is still that element of homophobia, which is very 80s, where he
Mm.
becomes the sort of like the camp character to come and see
Oh,
Victor
that's right.
Maitland,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and also the strip club feels almost like obligatory boob shots.
Agreed. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of them in any movie, if I'm honest, because it
Mm,
feels like tick, we have to have it. That's all it feels like. And actually, the scene, how it plays out and how it matters to them as a trio later, I like. I like that idea. They sort of went along with it. But that could have been anywhere. It could have, the fact it was a strip club feels unnecessary.
yeah,
That pause there was my brain also worrying at the same time, thinking like, but of course it's Axel putting them out of their comfort zone. And I don't know. Yeah. But I agree with you. Like, it feels forced.
yeah, it does. I mean, it feels you're right. It has a sort of a purpose because he's trying to put them off guard, isn't he? He's trying to throw them off,
Mm.
and then he has the whole conversation about whose dick can be hard, and again, sort of teasing Billy.
Yeah.
Um, but it does. It feels almost like shoehorned in,
Hmm.
where it could have been a different location. It
Yeah.
could have just been a bar, and
Yeah.
um, again, if you wanted to play the 48 hours card, you could have done like a biker bar or something else in Los
Hmm.
Angeles. So it just feels a bit like oh, tits and ass, that'll sell. That'll
Yeah.
be funny.
100%. Yeah.
Um, apart from that, I do like the scene because again, I think it's a turning point, isn't it, for their relationship where they take that you start to identify that Foley is a good cop. Like he
Hmm. Hmm.
recognizes the two guys sort of skulking in. He helps take them down with Taggart, and I
Hmm.
love the fact that Billy runs in at the end. And he's like, good job, well done, Billy. Good, good police work." So yeah, that's the turning point, and then he sort of, he actually defends them to Bogomil again.
Yeah. That's the super cop scene, isn't it? Which is
Mm.
famously a scene where they were all corpse and all through it. I don't know if you read the same thing. And
No,
you
I
see
haven't.
there's a bit when Taggart like looks down and looks like he's
Yeah,
getting stressed, but supposedly he was doing that because he just kept laughing and he couldn't stop himself. And Judge Reinhold's pinching himself on the thigh, supposedly, to keep himself from stop going.
right.
Because the other scene I noticed was the surge scene. You were talking about I hadn't thought of that scene with Stephen Burkos like bad guys being a bit homophobic. But you're right, it is. But I think because Serge earlier, although he's very camp, at no point does Murphy like be disgusted by him.
No.
He sort of just goes along and has fun, and he's playful with him, but he's not like, oh, like I'm not talking to you. That's another scene where you can definitely see both of them going all the way through it. Like Bronson Pinchot,
Yeah.
barely looks like he can get a word out before smiling. It's so good.
But again, it's sort of it fits, and I'll be careful with the words because again, I think they're what's his name that
Serge,
but yeah, shares Bronson Pinchot.
yeah.
It's this thing again of the 80s of like, yeah, he's camp, but like it's sort of like, oh, he's gay, but we don't. It doesn't really matter. It's. I always feel it's a bit like the camp gay character of the 80s was almost like a comedy sidekick, but was almost like always respected and loved, but was never like. But it was always an other. It was always other. But Serge isn't. But he's also he's the one with the funny accent.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay,
And that was like an 80s trope as well, isn't it? Because he can't say Axel Foley. Achwell?
Yeah.
Ahmed?
Yeah. That's the bit where he's going.
Yeah. And so it's played almost affectionately. It's never like offensive in the sense of like, they're not pointing him out and going, oh, he's a weirdo. It's just sort of like it's that sort of thing of being slightly uncomfortable.
Well, I think no more than anybody else because we've had Murphy walking down the street and laughing at the two guys and like the Thriller outfits, which I get is also a reference back to him because he did Raw.
Delirious and Delirious. Delirious. He wears the red
okay.
leather one. Yeah.
But so like it fits in with his whole like Beverly Hills is just a weird place full of weird people. So I think maybe that's why it doesn't play as being too offensive.
Yeah. No, it's good. I think genuinely because like Serge makes a return. He's not just a one-off character. So the fact he comes back later, not only in the series but in the film.
I believe he's in 4.
He's in 4,
yeah.
But he comes back later in the film, and he sort of Serge is comfortable and confident with who he is because he'll say like to Billy later on, and he's just like, oh, I make this wonderful copy with a lemon twist. And he's like, oh, if it's not too much trouble, he's like, don't be stupid, and he goes off to make it. And so he's good at what he does. So yeah, it is interesting. Like it's not. It's just I think it's things that like. If you were to just play this straight to say a younger generation today, I can imagine that there would be an element of, oh, this,
right,
this doesn't work, or this is whatever. But I don't think I'm not saying that we're old and craggy and different sensibilities, but like I don't find that it's offensive in the same way that I think Eddie Murphy can and has in 40 Hours and in some of the other films like has a tendency to do and fall back on. I even think like Coming to America sort of has more of this thing than Beverly Hills Cop, which is kind of surprised at, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. When Coming to America 2 came out, I watched, as I tend to do, I watched all of Eddie Murphy's like 80s movies up until Coming to America. So I thought, I'll just do a little rewatch. So that's only a couple of years ago, isn't it? So fairly recently watched, the 2 Beverly Hills Cops and Coming into America 1 and Trading Places. And so all those ones sort of around that era. And I think, Coming to America, you have to watch in a time capsule, don't you? I was trying to find my words there. Like you need to watch it and understand. Actually, probably you could argue it's really progressive for its time, having all these black characters in this representation of this African country and all these kind of things. Still, retrospectively looking at it from now, you could see people taking offense, couldn't you?
Yeah. But I think there's less of that, at least in this.
I agree. Yeah,
Beverly Hills Cop. And so it's interesting. Again, this thing around like the jokes that land as well, because again, one of the things I think about the humor is I was thinking about describing. We talked about an action film. Obviously, we talked about Stallone. This would have been an action film. This would have been Cobra, which I ain't gonna lie, there's a place in my heart for Cobra.
Oh yeah. I'm with you.
But people like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, so they were leaning heavily into the action, and I think this is an early action comedy, but it's more of a sort of it's a comedy. It's a comedy cop procedural rather. It's not quite an action film yet. Like there's action in it, but it's not quite the action film yet. But like with Eddie Murphy and just the way they're setting things up, I think it hits so quickly. Even if like some of the jokes don't land, like they're coming so quite thick and fast in parts that it just keeps a smile on my face throughout. This film does. But yeah, I think it's a success at that point. We haven't talked about the villain yet, but let's
go for it. Yeah, Steve Berkoff. I was just before we do go on, like the bit that stuck out to me because we keep coming back to Cobra, and I think for obvious reasons. But there's a moment when Eddie Murphy, I think it's really early on when he's still in Detroit, and it's when he goes back before he meets Mike, and he parks his car. I never understand why Americans can't just put their handbrake on, but they don't, and the car like starts to roll slightly down the hill,
yeah.
and he dashes back and he stops it, and that's kind of like a funny like okay, like he's a bit of a klutz.
He's poor. His car's crap, and it's because the same car he had
exactly.
when he was a kid and all this other stuff.
Yeah, so it sets that up. But then it made me think of like, oh yeah, there's that scene in Cobra when Stallone arrives home and he drives into like the gangbanger's car, and then it's all about pretense and like being a hard man and like who's like that toe to toe thing and who's going to move first. And I just I couldn't have imagined Stallone parking his car, his crappy rundown car, and then quickly dashing back and putting the handbrake on to get it to stop. Like again, like it was a moment that really jumped into my head for some reason of like the two different movies and what would have been and could have been had it been a Stallone vehicle.
Yeah. Now I'm convinced, and I've never read it anywhere, but just on reading between the lines, I really think Stallone was looking for his own Dirty Harry film.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, he was thinking
it is a revenge movie in a way as well, isn't it? Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Dirty Harry, 1971's a big year, and Dirty Harry sort of like up to the ante on like cop films and all this other stuff. And I think Stallone was going, okay, that's what I want to do. That's what we need to do. And I think he was looking to reestablish himself as a he'd done the army thing, he'd done the boxing thing, he wanted to do a cop thing, and I think it was he was looking. I think, but again, if someone else had guided Cobra and reined it in a little bit,
somebody said no once or twice, you mean?
Yeah. Like, why are you cutting pizza with a pair of scissors? That's weird. Don't do that. Lots of other things. Some of this dialogue needs to be sort of less, weirdly machismo. Then I don't know. It could have been a really interesting comparison. But yeah, I can't see him playing in the same sort of like this thing. It'd be angry. And the working class would be just angry. It would be angry working class sort of cop versus affluent Beverly Hills cops. So I don't think it would have been the meeting of minds that you get.
No, that's true.
In this other thing. So
sorry, I derailed you. Yes,
no, it's fine. Yeah. Stephen Berkoff. There are certain actors that could, I know Ronnie Cox as more of a villain. I love him in this, but RoboCop and Total Recall in particular. But Stephen Berkoff's one of those people that I've never seen him not be a baddie.
That's true. Yeah. He's really good in this.
Oh, yes.
I don't know. He doesn't like it, does he?
Does he not?
I think, one of the things I read in the trivia is that he hates this movie. He hates like his part in it and the role he played. And it is weird when you first meet him. You said Eddie Murphy goes in, Axel Foley goes in with his flowers and he kind of camps it up a bit there. But then Stephen Berkoff's bad guy sitting there in like a karate gi.
Kimono. Yeah.
It's weird, isn't it? Like he's sitting behind his desk with a shirt on.
Yeah.
And then like a kimono, a karate gi, or like, I don't know, something over the top. It's a look.
It's a Beverly Hills look. I mean,
that's what it is.
That gi probably cost like thousands of dollars from Armani or something. But he's good. I like Stephen Berkoff. He's one of these actors again. I like it when he is often the baddie and stuff like that, but he's a good presence.
He feels like a threat.
Yes, yeah, but he's one of these actors again. Like he knows he can be like villainous without being arch. He doesn't have to be sort of like he sits back. He's very sort of calm and he's got. I mean, again, they pair him with Jonathan Banks as Zach the henchman, so that works well. So he doesn't have to do the thingy, but he never played it again. Like another villainous actor would have probably played it more. Mustache twirling.
It would have been Bennett.
Yes, 100%, exactly that.
Yeah.
But he's not. So because of that, he feels sort of like a professional. Like,
Yeah, he's like a businessman, really, isn't he? Who just
yeah,
plies his trade in crime. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so
And that
yeah,
that restaurant scene really exemplifies what you said as well. Just like kind of quiet, just letting things happen around him, a little nod here and there to his men.
mm,
I mean, saying that, he's a little bit over the top the first time he meets Foley and he gets his men to throw him out of the window. That felt a little excessive. Just put him out the door. But I guess he's not doing that per se.
yeah. But that's again, but even that sort of serves a purpose, doesn't it? Because it's sort of they then because Foley's the one that says they threw me through a window, and then they say, well, we have several witnesses
Mm,
that say you threw something through a window and then jumped
yeah,
out.
yeah.
Um, so you feel like Foley's not the first person he's come across
Oh,
that
sure.
he's dealt with in this way.
Hmm.
So yeah, he's a it's an interesting because he's so calm and collected. Again, I like to think you go through the action movie baddies, as you
Hmm.
said. You get Bennett and who comes later and stuff, but like Hans Gruber is
Hmm.
always the
Hmm.
sort of like the benchmark for me. Like Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber, and again, I feel like Steven Berkoff is in that sort of
Yeah, definitely.
um camp. All Europeans are villains. That's just what we are. That's just how it works.
That's it.
Um,
And
so
his
yeah,
henchmen are great. Like you mentioned Jonathan Banks, and I
yeah.
had to look up his name, but the other guy, Michael Champion, and he's in Total Recall as well. And he's in Toy Soldiers, which I absolutely love
Oh,
because
Toy
that's
Soldier is a great film.
something I used to watch on hard rotate. Or big Die
Mm,
Hard fans, right? You and me. So we
mm,
watched the kids' version of Die Hard. Um, yeah, like I love them as like these kind of heavies. They're just like normal looking dudes. It's nice. It's
yeah,
back in this time, you could be normal looking to be a henchman or like be in a movie. You didn't, nowadays it'd be Chris Hemsworth and Liam Hemsworth or something. Do you know what I mean? It'd be like two really super good looking ripped dudes. Then it was just like two normal looking dudes and they're heavies
with
and
a
they're
receding
henchmen.
hairline. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Michael Champion, not I think after this starts wearing like really big glasses, doesn't he?
yeah,
Total Recall and Toy Soldiers. I just remember him having like really square, like Dennis Taylor style glasses.
yeah. Um, so yeah. The thing is as well with the henchmen, it's you know, I mean, he humiliates Zach, Jonathan Banks in the restaurant scene. Like,
Mm,
he judo throws him over the buffet table and other stuff. So it feels like there's no egos in this film. Like, they know it's an Eddie Murphy vehicle and he's going to get all the glory. That's fine. But everyone else recognizes it and is like, yeah, okay, we're all working to that
mm,
model and to that story. And so I think that works really well. So it's just, I think this is one of those things, to get back to what this is.
mm,
The thing we've sort of headed in, I think, and I'm gonna throw something in a minute, right? Because it was sometimes it sort of struck me as I was watching it. I'm interested, especially because from the action genre, this is something I think you'll have an input on. Bruckheimer and Simpson, they saw a potential in Eddie Murphy. They've had this script. It models to Murphy in
mm-hmm.
that they can do what they can with him. They put a really competent cast around him that support. I think I obviously do. I think we cracked the nut on that. I think they are there as a support network to
Yeah,
help
you're
him
right.
through some of the more dramatic scenes. Murphy becomes more confident. It's simple plot,
Hmm.
but like you have the fish out of water. It feels the film feels like Americana in the
Hmm.
sense
Hmm.
of like you're learning about America in the same way. This film is this is Detroit and
Yeah.
it's downtrodden. It's working class. This is Beverly Hills and this is lost. This is the West Coast. Um, this is a true Murphy vehicle, and everyone's working to that goal, and in doing so, it works.
Mm.
Um, and we'll talk about the Beverly Hills Cop 2 and 3 and everything in a bit, but like but this feels to me like it was designed to, and successfully designed to be a star vehicle.
Definitely. Yeah. And, I think we've spoken about, we did some of the Jackie Chan stuff and I've been going through all the states. And when you and I've done some of ours, sometimes that molding of a pre-existing script to an actor doesn't quite work. And actually,
Yeah.
All the diehards after Die Hard were pre-existing scripts or pre-existing stories that they
Mm.
then molded to be a Die Hard. And at times they were better than others. It doesn't always pay off, does it? Because sometimes the material doesn't quite match how the actor chooses to perform it or what, I don't know. But here,
Yeah.
definitely, and I think I just come back to that warehouse scene. I think that's the highlight of this movie in terms of. I think you're right. That dramatic scene for Murphy is, oh, okay, he can do this stuff. I love what you said there. But kind of the comedy is for me is all in that warehouse scene when he's pretending to be this inspector, and the way that he just talks everybody around and it's clever. So when he meets the first guy, it's the security guard who's been caught there. Not a big surprise he's been caught because he's just brazenly walking around, not trying to
Yeah.
hide. But then he asks that guy for a match, and he says, "Well, you can't light it in here." And he's like, "No, no, I'll go outside." But so then when he meets the supervisor, he's like, "Can you believe it? This guy gave me a match. What's
Yeah.
he?" So but there's a cleverness to what he's doing. So it's
Mm.
improvisational, but it's done with a sense of kind of, as you said, street smarts and being able to move chess pieces around and think ahead of like when he goes to the supervisor, then I can use this against him. And yeah, it really is. And I guess, that's what good improvisers do, don't they? They're
Mm.
funny in the moment, but they think about what that moment will do as a setup for the next joke and the next joke and the next joke.
Yes. Because this is what I was thinking is that we have these star vehicles or these films that made careers,
Mm,
and they are, you talk about Top Gun
mm,
for Tom Cruise. Conan the Barbarian is the Schwarzenegger sort of stamp.
mm-hmm,
Um, I think obviously we said about Rocky, but I think First Blood really sort of like elevates Stallone and stuff like that. You have those sort of like single person vehicles.
mm-hmm.
Often they're action things. We get them into the 90s. I think they've gone
Mm,
because I think we get a lot of like ensemble casts.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But there's been one person that has been trying, in my opinion, like we're watching this film 40 years later, and granted, you and I are sort of like um, let's put it this way, we're older than John Ashton is when he
That is
made this
true.
film, right? Um, so we look back, we watched when we were younger, too young, but I still think this works as a film.
Mm-hmm.
Right, this film's cleaned up, and I watched it in HD, and it looks great.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I think the action's good. I think the performances are great. This film works. Right, this
Mm-hmm,
is a classic, and it's a milestone in American cinema. I think about Dwayne Johnson,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and again, because I've seen this before, where he makes all these millions, he makes these films. Like, I don't think The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, has ever had a film that he's never had a like a Beverly Hills Cop of
Mm.
in that way. And I always wonder, like, what if he had met Bruckheimer and
Mm.
Simpson and they'd done it for him?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's nothing that's been like tooled for his specific.
Not to make a classic. Or they've had films
Yeah,
tooled to him, and he's tried to do things. I think of like them like Faster and the Rundown or Welcome to the Jungle.
yeah,
Done
Walking Tall, and
Walking
I know that's a
Tall.
remake, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like he did all those weird
yeah.
sort of films, but like
Mm.
he's never had a film where you've gone like even like the Jumanji films, like he's part of an ensemble,
Yeah,
and
you're right. Yeah,
it's him and Kevin Hart like have become a double act.
yeah.
But he's the kind of actor or the kind of performer that you would be like, he's charismatic and he could do this stuff, like, but he's never had a. Every time he's done it, like I don't know, it just felt weird to me. I was watching this and thinking like,
Mm.
it's weird how we don't get these kind of like star making movies anymore, really, in the same way that we used to.
No, I mean, I guess people playing a titular superhero is the only thing really. We've had that for the decade or whatever it's been. But you're right. There's not like outside of that. There's not really been anything or anyone. No, not
No,
that's made it big, not that's hit it, and not that has made a film that you would consider like a milestone or
that
a classic within
multi-quadrant,
its genre.
yeah, like
Or
that
yeah,
multi-quadrant film that makes it. Even like Matt Damon, Matt Damon was doing all kinds of stuff in the 90s. It was a known commodity. Then does like the Bourne Ultimatum, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, he can also do action
mm,
very, very well, and
mm,
it becomes a different kettle of fish, really.
mm. No, that's a thinker
Mm.
because I like nobody jumps to mind, which would probably argue there isn't anybody without having to really delve into heavy research on like who would fill that void. I think you're right. It's just not the type of film that's being made now, I guess.
No, but I do wonder, because I said I watched this back to back, relatively close with Bad Boys 4. And with they've had Bad Boys 3 and Bad Boys 4 come out in relatively quick succession
Mm.
in a couple of years. But then also, we've got Axel F coming back, which
Hmm.
is why we're doing this. Um, I do wonder if there is an element of like studios looking and going, action sort of cop films could be kind of like less money,
Hmm.
and we could be
Right.
doing
Yeah.
this,
We can make this for 50 million, for 80 million, and we'll get a really good
we could,
turnaround on that and a good
yeah.
profit. And yeah.
Because I do wonder if like it's the star vehicles that were making people who were making
Mm.
the money. Because I was thinking, like Chris Hemsworth has done on for Netflix, like the two Extraction films,
Hmm.
and they're not massive, but I do think if they were released in cinema, they probably would have been bigger, and they're both really
Yeah.
good. Um, yeah, but there's no one that's sort of gone. This is, I don't see those films anymore. But I do kind of, I don't know, just watching these recently and a few others, I'm like, I feel like this is going to be the thing again soon.
Might
I
come
don't know
back
why
into the cycle. Yeah, that's interesting. And we know these things happen
they
in
do.
cycles,
Yeah,
don't they? And it does feel like, I'm not gonna get on a soapbox. I don't hate any of the MCU or the
no, no, no.
DCU or like none of that. Like there's merits and there's demerits and there's good ones and bad ones. But it does feel like we are coming to the end of that cycle now, doesn't it? So something will need to take its place. It would be interesting what that would be, and that would be a lateral move for a lot of those actors if they want to stay in the game,
Mm.
and would be somewhere where a new name could crop up for sure. Yeah.
I think it's that cycle of we'll wrap up on
Mm.
this with like, this is because I think this is the start. I think this film we talk about the early 80s. I think Beverly Hills Cop is an important part of it. Is that cycle of
Mm. Hmm.
star making films of the late 70s and 80s.
It's a hell of a year, 84, isn't it?
Oh, it's an
You've
amazing
got
year.
this. You've obviously got Ghostbusters, Terminator's 84, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Um, Something else. I think Jason comes the year after. So the next one, and you get 84 is just one of those years where you just like, oh
Mm.
my god. Oh, Temple of Doom.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it's a good year
Mm.
for movies. But yeah, I just know there's this thing I'm thinking of like we are looking I think soon at getting star making vehicles again maybe.
Mm.
Um,
I guess what's interesting is, some of the names we've mentioned are still stars, aren't they? Like Cruise is still a star.
mm,
He still is that one who can keep opening a movie and keep, yeah. And who would be willing, they can't keep doing this forever, can they? And we can keep resurrecting these characters, but again, we also can't do that forever. They
no,
will run out too as well. Who would be the person to step up into
there are a
that
few.
window? It's interesting,
Yeah,
isn't it?
because you in the 80s, this made Murphy a what do they call it? Like a tent pole,
Hmm. Hmm.
a marquee name. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Like you could be like, the head of the poster would be Eddie Murphy,
Mm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
as you say, sort of like, this is about the same time that all of a sudden like Schwarzenegger or Stallone or and eventually it would be Tom Cruise in. They all became those things.
Yeah.
Today, I think you're right. Tom Cruise still sells films.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but Axel F coming out, it's more the character than I think Murphy, but it's a combination. I think Eddie Murphy's done a few. Your boy Jason Statham, I think, is one of the few
Hmm.
today where it's like, oh, it's a Statham film.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like he does a Statham movie. There are very few people like that. That
Mm.
I think he's the one. He's probably one of the few that's really carrying the torch. And doing it in cinemas still.
Yeah. 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 There's a space in the market for him, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And I think things like what was his name? The I was going to call it the bumblebee then, but it's not. It's the beekeeper.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was a success, and he's done it. I
Yeah.
think that was not a massive budget, and I think
Really small, actually,
yeah.
comparatively for a lot of his films. Yeah.
And I think again, if Axel F does well for
Hmm.
Netflix, I think we will start to see some of these coming back, and it'll be good to see.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, we shall wrap up on Beverly Hills Cop. Any final thoughts then for 1984's Beverly Hills Cop?
The only thing that that I was left with when we finished, obviously knowing what a big Ghostbusters fan you are, was that connection that Murphy was originally going to be in it, and it's really, we talked about Stallone, how he could have been in Beverly Hills Cop, but also how like it would have been a totally different world had Murphy been in Ghostbusters. And if I'm right, he left that project to take this one on. So he obviously he saw the star value of being the number one name here and not being part of the ensemble there.
Well, also he didn't want to be third or fourth billed.
Yeah, which he would have been, right?
Which he would have been in Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
And so yeah, to be top billed, he made the right choice. I totally think it's the right thing to do. Yeah. And it also
for both franchises as well. Let's be clear. There's a benefit to Ghostbusters that he wasn't in it, because I think he would have been too big of a character, right, for that.
Which is
role.
Part of the problem, I think, was Murray didn't like it. Bill Murray was not pleased. I don't think he likes anything, though, to be perfectly honest.
No, that it does come across that way.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say, the unfortunate thing is, of course, because then it became Ernie Hudson, and then the moment that they met Ernie Hudson, and I love Ernie Hudson, I think he's a great actor. They were like, he's no Eddie Murphy, so they started to distribute the Murphy-esque lines about, and they reduced Ernie Hudson's role a bit, which is a real shame. But it is what it is. But yeah, I agree. This is, as we said, the point is, I think this is watching this. It's been a little while since I watched this, but watching this, it really dawned on me how monumental this must have been in 1984 to see this film and be like, oh shit, like Eddie Murphy is a star. Like, this is Hollywood opening up for him at this point.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, great film. And it'll be interesting to see, because I'm interested to see what you think of 2, which came 2 years later. And we move to a director who, very much like with Bruckheimer and Simpson, is linked with action, with Tony Scott, one of my favorite sort of like 80s, 90s directors. But is it too much, or is it the right combination? We will see, because the second one is very 80s, and I adore. It's a great combination. Anyway, Jack, for now, like, where can people find you, and what are you doing at the moment?
So we've spoken about the Stath a couple of times. That's wrapping up. I'm coming towards the end of season 1 of Back to Filmography. So at the time of this recording, I've got 2 left. I've got Expendables 4 and The Beekeeper. Then I'll do some sort of wrap-up show, and then some sort of announcement. Some people already know of who season 2 will be focused on. So that's been a really
not
great
only do
journey.
we know, not only do we know, I've put my stake in the ground on several of them. So
yeah. So, but that's been great, and obviously I'll keep coming back to the Stath, because I do love him. But yeah, if people want to get in contact, X is the place where I'm most active, I would say. Still, essentially just posting pictures of the film I'm watching. This is what I'm watching today. This is what I'm watching today, and then I will interact, but I don't really say a lot on there.
Yeah. Very much like hashtag now watching is
that's about
like
it.
myself. Yeah. So go on. It's at I am Jack's Musings, and also at Back to the Filmography.
Thank you. You're much better at this than I am. Yeah. And Tony and I continue to do all our little projects as well. So please, Comics in Motion, have a look on there. We do our season's greetings and our actually bibliography, and whether else I might crop up. We're talking to the creators of Goblin, so that will either have just come out or be coming out, of the comic book Goblin and Goblin 2. They're really great guys, so we had a nice chat with them.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So yeah, that's at Comics in Motion, but also just Comics in Motion, and that on all your podcast catchers. Cool. Well, for us, as you can see, it's everything that's at 20th Century Geek across as many platforms. I try and use them, sort of. Basically, it's a bit of a dumpster fire on most social media today. So, but you will find us doing things. We also have at just www.20thcenturygeek.com. Loads of stuff sort of on there, different blogs and different things, loads of stuff from history. But do check out our Patreon. On the Patreon, we do a lot of other things alongside our sister podcast, Stories Out of Time and Space. We're doing an apocalypse season at the moment. We've done all of Mad Max, and we're now working our way through. We're actually going to be doing the first 4 Alien films. We're doing the Alien films. Prometheus and Covenant can fuck off, as far as I'm concerned. In the run up to Romulus. But yeah, we've got those things. So please check out www.patreon.com/20CG Media. A whole host of stuff on there. and more news to come on what's coming out soon. Anyway, for now, Jack, thank you very much for coming on, and look forward to talking Beverly Hills Cop 2 soon.
Definitely. Thank you, mate.
All right.